Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the webinar series on managing drought in the Southern Plains. I'm Mark Schaefer with the Southern Climate Impacts Planning Program. I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. Rachel Riley, SCIP Associate Program Manager, is managing the webinar. Today's webinar is a shortened version to provide an update on the current drought status and outlook. Our extended webinars that include a focus topic will be held on the second Thursdays of each month, with these shortened briefings on the fourth Thursday. Brian Fuchs, climatologist and drought monitor author at the National Drought Mitigation Center, will be presenting the update. We have several state climatologists on the call as well, in case there are questions related to specific areas within our region. The webinar should last about 20 to 30 minutes. This is part of an ongoing series made possible through the support of several organizations, including the National Drought Mitigation Center, the National Integrated Drought Information System, and NOAA Regional Climate Services Director for the Southern Region. We also greatly appreciate those of you who joined us in this webinar series and recognize the valuable time that you are committing to participate. You will now see on your screen a poll of topics for future webinars. The topics for the next webinar, April 12th, will be the impacts on wildlife. This will include changes in animal behavior, assistance provided to help them cope in migratory waterfowl. Please select what you would like to see, what you'd like to hear as our next focus topic in May. You can also share your thoughts with us through the chat box or by emailing or calling us at SCIP. Okay, you may ask questions or make comments at any time through typing into your chat box. We will address questions at the end of the presentation. Each webinar is recorded and posted on the SCIP YouTube channel. Slides and summaries from previous topics are posted on the NIDIS Drought portal in the Southern Plains region and on the SCIP website. You can also friend SCIP on Facebook for updates. Okay, before beginning the presentation, I'd like to briefly mention a series of meetings related to the establishment of the new South Central Climate Science Center. The Climate Science Center is one of 8 regional centers established by the U.S. Department of Interior. The centers are designed to better integrate the best available climate science with on-the-ground management practices for critical habitat and landscapes. The South Central Climate Science Center is hosting a series of rollout meetings in the region over the next couple of months. We invite you to participate in a meeting near you so that your interests can be reflected in the center's research priorities. I would also like to mention that NIDIS and NOAA are planning a 3rd drought forum to be held in Lubbock on April 26th. Additional information will be available shortly. I will now turn it over to Brian Fuchs for an update on drought conditions and outlooks. Brian?
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everyone, and hopefully you can hear me fine. Again, I'm Brian Fuchs. I'm a climatologist here at the National Drought Mitigation Center and also one of the Drought Monitor authors, and I'm going to be giving an update of conditions in the region as well as a little bit of an outlook. So we'll go right into things with the first slide. Here's this morning's U.S. Drought Monitor. As you can see, the rains this week have continued to put a dent into the drought conditions all the way along the I-35 corridor and eastward. We see some larger areas of drought-free conditions and also some expansion of where we're seeing the D0 or the abnormally dry. A lot of the lingering conditions that we're still seeing throughout the region have to do with hydrology that's still slowly recovering as this water creeps down into deeper depths. See some drought still lingering in the southeast as well as developing in much of the western U.S. Next slide is a regional perspective, and we can really see that the current regional map is showing that still 58 and almost 59% of the region is still seeing some kind of drought conditions. Compared to where we were 3 months ago, though, it's about a 20% increase where we were right at 80%. And a year ago, right at 75%. So, yes, this La Nina winter has definitely been helpful to the region, and we have seen quite a bit of rain over the last several months showing this improvement. What I will mention, though, is there has been quite a bit of a stark contrast from west to east through the Southern Plains as far as where the rains have taken place and where they have not. And you can still see that through portions of the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles, southwest Kansas, as well as eastern New Mexico. Those areas have not picked up these beneficial rains that we've seen over the last several months, and they have had some rainfall, and it is a drier time of the year, so we weren't really expecting huge improvements during this time, but they definitely have been left out in all this rain that the region has received over the last several months. Just perspective on some of this rainfall, I went into the Regional Climate Center's ACES systems and then pulled up some of their maps. And the upper right is just the 30-day departure from normal. You can really see, again, some of these areas are pushing 3 to 4.5 inches above normal just in the last 30 days. And then in the last 90 days in the bottom left-hand panel, you can see that that area has definitely grown from most of East Texas, most of Oklahoma, anywhere from 3 to 9, even 12 inches above normal in the last 90 days. Next slide. And you can see the year-to-date in the upper right-hand panel on this slide that, very much a non-La Nina signal with this, that much of Texas has been above normal, and even much of Oklahoma during this time from January 1st on, anywhere from 6 to 9, even 12 inches above normal conditions during this time. But then again, here's the contrast in the bottom left-hand panel, just letting us know exactly how dry it had been during this time. Over the last 12 months, you can still see that much of the area is still showing negative departures from normal from last March to this March. And what you can see is there are some areas, like I mentioned, the Texas Panhandle, Oklahoma Panhandle, into New Mexico, West Texas. Some of these areas are anywhere from 12 to 16 inches below normal yet for the last 12 months. And you can also look along the Gulf Coast of Texas, and some of these areas are 16 to 20 inches below normal. So the question came in already to me today is how can you still be showing drought in some of these areas when we've had so much rain over the last couple of weeks, and even the last couple of months? And this picture does say a lot, that there's still a lot of deficit in the region that is still behind some of the impacts we're seeing. Next slide. The 12-month SPI in the upper right-hand corner shows this even a little bit better using the SPI technique versus a departure from normal. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, we really see that this wet signal that we typically will expect in the Ohio River Valley during the La Nina winter really has elongated itself all the way into East Texas. And you can see in the area that I highlighted with the red oval, this area has been significantly wet over the last 6 months, and we would have expected that on the northern end of it during the La Nina type of winter, but not extending as far south as it did. So it was very welcomed, especially on what we did see last year during the drought region. Next slide. Here is the outlook for the next 5 days, and we'll start in the bottom left panel with the precipitation. We can see that the big upper level low is slowly creeping to the east, and we may even see some backside precipitation through the southern plains with that. And again, the heaviest precipitation amounts are going to be from southern Louisiana and Mississippi all the way up into the mid-Atlantic, which maybe will help with some of the drought conditions in those regions. Temperatures are going to stay warm. Upper right-hand panel, you can see anywhere from 27 degrees above normal in the Dakotas to 6 to 12 degrees above normal through the southern plains, even 15 to 18. The Oklahoma Panhandle into Kansas. So this warm pattern that we have seen is going to continue breaking anytime soon. Next panel. 8 to 14, again with the temperatures on the left-hand panel, really showing that there's a very high likelihood of temperatures being above normal during this time. And the 8 to 14 changed a little bit from yesterday. We had seen a little bit more of a wetter pattern extending up into the central plains. Now that seems to be cutting off around Kansas, and we're seeing some drier signals punch in there. But we're still seeing that wet signal over much of the southern plains, so I anticipate further recovery is possible over the next 2 weeks if these outlooks do verify. Next slide. again, here is the April outlook as well as the April, May, and June, and we see the temperature forecast or outlook is really staying put with above normal temperatures anticipated through this time frame. Even April, May, and June, we see this all the way through the southern U.S. into the eastern U.S. of a very high likelihood of above normal temperatures during this time. Precipitation for April, we're seeing that dry signal establishing itself more so over the Four Corners region in the southwest, and maybe a little bit more of equal chances starting to push in where we have seen those heavy rainfalls. That wet signal of maintains itself over the Ohio River Valley during this time. And for April, May, and June, equal chances through the southern U.S. And what this is really telling me is that La Nina signal that we have been seeing is really going neutral during this time, and we should see ourselves in an ENSO neutral state, which would mean more equal chances. And the seasonal drought outlook that was released on the 15th last week is really showing this. You see the improvements being noted through the southern and central plains, and this is really corresponding well to where we did see the rains this week, and changes will probably be continuing on the U.S. Drought Monitor into next week, as the cutoff date is Tuesday morning for any precipitation amounts. So anything that happened after that point will be considered for next week's map, and we'll probably see additional improvements where those heaviest amounts have taken place and the impacts are lessened. We are seeing some further development in the southwest and even into the central Rockies, as they have had a fairly dry winter and snow accumulations are lagging behind in many of those regions. Next slide. That is my last slide, so if you have any questions, I think we're going to hold those off to the end, and my contact information is up there. So any questions, we'll just hold off onto the end, and Mark, I'll let you introduce the next speaker.
All right, thank you, Brian. As Brian noted, there have been dramatic changes across our region in the last few weeks. Our region's state climatologists have some updates to mention. We'll begin with Dave Dubois for New Mexico. Dave?
All right, thank you. This is Dave Dubois, state climatologist for New Mexico, and I just want to give a brief briefing. First, as Brian mentioned, we saw the maps for New Mexico. So we haven't seen a lot of that recovery over in our part of the region. So we're still seeing this the D3, D4, the extreme, exceptional in southeast New Mexico were the most impacts. There has been a few little rain events, but not enough to curb any of the changing in the regions or getting out of extreme. And we still have quite a bit of moderate and severe in northeast and southwest New Mexico. The northwest corner by the Four Corners has been seeing some relief, but then there's sort of a sharp gradient going into Arizona where they're having problems for on the New Mexico side. There's a little bit more precip. So but the positive thing is the water year up to February, it hasn't been as bad as last year. So and one thing I just want to bring forward is the basin outlooks from NRCS. And I think it may be the same message for this coming when they do the April updates for this. The modeling is, let me just read it there. It says, although runoff forecasts are not nearly as low as last year, irrigators and water managers statewide should be planning for lower than average runoff and possibly reduce irrigation allocations. So I think that's one of the messages that we need to focus on because of the lack of really good snowpack. So you can advance to the next slide, please. Okay, I just want to pull off some maps of basically just a recent for March. So this is the percent of average precip. So most of the state, there's been some slightly below normal snows up in the Sangre de Cristo and up in the Rio Grande watershed. There's been a few. I just highlighted some of those places where that is not below normal. There was on some of the mountain ranges, the Sacramento's. There's been some snow up in Cloudcroft and Ruidoso, and then Angel Fire up in the northern part of up there. They've had almost 2 feet within March. So there's been some relief, little areas like that, but the rest of the state in the southeast hasn't had a lot. So next slide, please. And then just looking at the average temperatures, there's sort of a line that divides east and west New Mexico. You can see this cooler than normal over on the west side of the state and warmer than normal on the east side of the state. So it's kind of a pattern we've been seeing. The storm tracks have been following the over on the west side. So next slide. Okay, just looking at some of the snow tell, that's where a lot of our focus is on this year and this season. We picked up some. This is from Wayne Sweep at NRCS Hotel. And we're actually going to have another art call in New Mexico in about 20 minutes or so. But basically, the message that we're going to be talking about is sort of that bottom table, looking at the upper Rio Grande Basin in both Colorado and New Mexico. The snow water equivalent is still below normal, but it's not really bad. It's not as bad as last year. So we've got 80% up in the Colorado, the state of Colorado in the basin, and then in the New Mexico basin, we're down to 76%. So it's definitely not what we're looking for. So next slide. Okay, so there's some of the points I grabbed off of the basin outlook. We've got the stream flows are pretty good for the Red River, but the Rio Grande are about 70% down toward Socorro. So the reservoir storage is not looking real good either for this season starting. So we're total reservoir storage is down from last year, and then we're just in the next sentence is just under half of the 30-year average for total reservoirs. And then picking out one of them, because it's a focus a lot in the lower Rio Grande, like the Elephant Butte storage, about 28% of the February average. So not looking good. So next slide, please. And I just wanted to highlight just one event. Basically it's this past storm event that is over Texas now. It was pretty unusual for this strong event. We've got in the southern New Mexico, there was not a lot of precip. There was a lot of virga, so it was very dry on the surface layer. And then they got a few flurries and snowpack, a little bit up in north, but the big issue was a lot of winds and some sublimation of the snow. So I just highlighted some of the wind gusts in this area, pretty strong. And I just snapped that picture. This was Sunday afternoon here in Las Cruces, and visibility was down to a few places about a tenth of a mile. That picture is about a third of a mile visibility in town. So pretty spectacular, but that's the kind of thing we don't want to see too often. Folks have mentioned that it's one of the strongest ones we had in 5-6 years. So that's all I have to say. So next, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Next up, we have Brent McRoberts filling in for John Nielsen Gammon for Texas. Brent is the assistant state climatologist, and he's going to talk about some new innovations they have in Texas to help manage this drought. Brent?
Yeah, basically it's just this one slide that John wanted me to mention this. I'm sure there are a few participants in this session that participated in the first call we had on Monday, very similar to what we're doing right now, just to sort of get some feedback and opinions on how to depict Texas and the U.S. Drought Monitor, and then pass those along to whoever the author is that week. It is 1 o'clock Central Time on Mondays. Email, NG. There's his email address right there. And really, that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Brent. And I think it is very important. We talked on the last webinar about the U.S. Drought Monitor process and the value that comes from local and state inputs. This coordination is really critical to getting those local depictions correctly. So really encourage everybody to join in on what they're setting up to the Texas State. Thanks. Next up, we have Barry Kahn, who's going to fill in some very recent changes, I guess, in Louisiana. Barry?
All right, thank you, Mark. Yeah, Brian Fuchs gave an excellent presentation. He had a 2-day hiatus in there, which were very significant to Louisiana. That's this past Tuesday and Wednesday. And this first slide is basically just showing the radar-derived precipitation over the past 2 days, including both the top one, for all intents and purposes, would be Tuesday. The bottom one would be the rainfall that took place yesterday. And as you can see in the top panel, western Louisiana just getting nailed with heavy rainfall. That area in white, a fairly narrow swath, I might add, but still significant nevertheless. That area had 10 inches or more of rainfall. And as you can see, much of western Louisiana got hit pretty hard with rains. And then as we move on down to Wednesday, we can see the sort of the slow movement of this frontal system. And as a result, the eastern half of Louisiana then got hit pretty hard, with south central Louisiana coming in with 2 to 3 inches. So obviously we've had quite a bit of rain in the last couple of days that is not depicted in the most recent issue of the drought monitor. And I might add that there's still even more rain in the forecast for Louisiana today, especially in the eastern half. And of course, the sun's out big and bright right now here in Baton Rouge, but the forecast, we have a 60% chance of rain today. So we may be adding to some of these totals. Can you give me the next slide? So this just shows the state of the drought monitor as of obviously Tuesday morning. And I didn't recommend any changes this week because all our rains actually came in after the deadline. So I would fully anticipate some fairly significant changes coming in for the next issue of the drought monitor. But I do want you to notice, in fact, if for those of you who have the ability to see the rain from yesterday, the extreme southeastern part of Louisiana really didn't get hit that hard with the rain. So while I do expect to see some improvements across much of the state, the extreme southeastern part of Louisiana is still probably going to have some issues. So I'll go ahead and leave it there.
Okay, thanks, Barry. I'd also like to mention too, Barry pointed out that the rains came after the cutoff. There is a cutoff of Tuesday morning for the data that goes into the drought monitor, so that there's enough time to make the assessment. So even though it comes out on Thursday, it doesn't always reflect the rains that maybe fell on Wednesday or even Tuesday. We try to bring that into account as much as we can, but there's just not enough time to go through all those 80-some products Gary McManus and Renee McPherson from Oklahoma and Mary Nat from Kansas are not able to join us on the call today, but they wanted to provide an update, so I'm going to fill in for them. As Brian mentioned, most of Oklahoma picked up at least 1 inch of rain in the last week, with nearly 7 inches in eastern Oklahoma. If March were to end today, it would be the 10th wettest on record, with a statewide average of 4.3 inches and a surplus of 2.1 inches. This follows a wet pattern that began last fall. For the water year beginning October 1st, it ranks as the 12th wettest on record, with a statewide average of over 17 inches and a surplus of 3.6 inches. For the water year, we started the year at 100% of the state in D1 to D4 drought, some stage of drought. We're now standing at 37%. And in the D4, the exceptional drought, a year ago, water year in October, 2/3 of the state were at D4 drought. Now we're down to just 3%. So the drought area has really been diminished substantially through these fall rains. In Kansas, Mary says that while the eastern third of the state has had significant improvement, the central portion has had less, and the western third little to no improvement. As you can see there, the 30-day pattern matches very closely with the 90-day pattern, is that it's reinforced over the last 90 days, which western Kansas has missed out on most of the rainfall events. So you've seen some increase in drought depictions there in western part, while you've seen the improvement in the east. Okay, we'll now open it up to any questions and comments that you've posted. I see that Denise at Drought Mitigation Center has pointed out some very interesting information about decisions being made on planting acres of cotton in Texas and New Mexico because of the lower water allocations from the Rio Grande. So if there's any other questions, please go ahead and post them. As a reminder, the webinar recording will be posted to the SKIP YouTube page, and our next webinar will be on April 12th with a focus on the impacts on wildlife. As always, we encourage you to continue to spread the word to make sure all those dealing with aspects of this drought are part of the larger community and can access the support they need. And I would also like to remind everybody of the upcoming meetings. There's the ones with the Climate Science Center at several locations over the next month or two, and the Drought Forum, which is still being planned right now, so we hope to have some more information out very shortly on that. But will be held in Lubbock on April 26th, and that will be structured much the same way as the ones that were held in Austin in July and in Fort Worth in November, and in which we do the morning part talking about the kind of the climate and the evolution of the drought and the drivers and outlets for it, and then the afternoon focused on some of the impacts and management strategies related to it for particular to that area. So it'll be focused heavily on New Mexico, West Texas, and on up into the Oklahoma Panhandle and southern Colorado, where the drought is still very much raging. Well, we want to thank you for your time today, and look forward to continuing this conversation with you in the future. So I hope everybody has a good day, and